So I hope Dr. Kaushik got the cup of coffee.
Yes, my coffee is here. So
Great. Nice. So I think for Dr. Nirvekar Singh it's too early in the morning.
No, it's not too early. It's fine.
Good.
For the question and answers, will there be questions on chat?
Yes, they can write on chat, but you can ask them personally, some of them to,
Yeah.
So you have to handle the whole process of initiating Dr. Nirvekar Singh's lecture and continuing up to discussion, and last remarks are yours.
Fine.
So
Yeah.
now I request Dr. Traminder Singh Oba to formally welcome the guests.
Honorable Professor Nirbekar Singh, Distinguished Professor of Economics, University of California, Professor Kaushik Basu, Professor of Economics and Karl Marx Professor of International Studies, Cornell University, USA, former Chief Economist, Senior Vice President, World Bank, USA, and dear participants in the webinar, my dear staff members, Dr. Lakhvinder Gill, the convener of the seminar, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. It's indeed a great honor for Khalsa College Patiala that the economists of international repute, the scholars of high eminence, they are there with us to talk upon the most important concern, the most important area nowadays we are facing in Punjab, that is the study of Punjab economy, the crisis of Punjab economy. So first of all, I welcome these two distinguished guests who are participating, who are delivering the talk to us, to the staff, students of Khalsa College Patiala, and to many other luminaries of the field who have joined through this Zoom web portal. Professor Nirbekar Singh is an economist very much concerned about the Punjab economy. Professor Kaushik Basu, again a great economist. So welcome you, sir. I hope and believe that the views expressed, the deliberations which will take place, they'll definitely guide and goad the Punjab economy, the people who are ultimately at the helm of the affairs of Punjab economy, that how can we go in far that kind of Punjab, which is known to be the #1 state of India. So thank you very much for being with us. I once again welcome to you in Khalsa College Patiala, this lecture series. Thank you very much. Professor Gill, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Traminder Singh Oba, for saying few words as a welcome address. Honorable Professor Kaushik Basu, distinguished Professor of Economics, Dr. Nirvekar Singh, Dr. Traminder Singh Oba, Principal of the Khalsa College, various participants from England, the United States of America, Canada, and all parts of India. My dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, today's webinar lecture is being organized in the lecture series initiated by Khalsa College Patiala. The title of this series is to have a revival strategy for Punjab economy. And Professor Nirvekar Singh is expected to speak on Punjab's economy, rescue and rebirth. I think this is a very important, pertinent topic. And the fundamental aim of this series is that from the last 30 years period of time, which we have initiated reforms in India, and during this particular period of time, Punjab had irregular elected democratic governments from the last 30 years period of time without any break. And I think that this is a great achievement in terms of Punjab's history of democracy. And I think that the division of the six governments, three were, formed by the Congress government, Congress party in Punjab, and the three governments were formed by Akali Dal and BJP. So I think that the equal amount of number of 15 years were available to each one of them, but still you'll find that Punjab slipped from number one position in India to lagging behind up to 10th position now, and it's uh, the slide is keep on growing. So that means we are continuously not able to arrest the slide. Moreover, the challenges which Punjab economy has faced over a long period of time, both are structural and transitory. But you'll find that the political leadership of Punjab failed to provide the adequate policy measures that could have helped to alleviate the challenges which we have been facing. So rather than they have deepened the problems which Punjab economy has been facing. So therefore, it is pertinent to especially talk about during a particular period of time when the seventh democratic elected government is expected to take place in the early next year. So therefore, you'll find that now all the political parties in Punjab are preparing to contest elections. And the simple agenda which they have been putting forward is pushing the same old kind of, popular kind of measures. They are not able to accept the kind of challenges Punjab economy has been facing and continue to face. Therefore, the duty of the intellectuals globally who are well-wishers of Punjab is to set the agenda in a particular perspective so that you'll find that Punjab uh, policy makers must address to those kind of challenges which Punjab is facing. So there are difficult questions one has to ask, and those difficult questions requires a kind of policy resolution. So my attempt here is, and especially Khalsa College attempt here is, that we shall be able to lead the discussions, provide some kind of sufficient amount of, policy resources to the people who are interested in. But I think the more important question need to be asked is when we are going to propose policy measures, one has to ask another question: who are the buyers of this kind of policy questions? So all these kind of things need to be taken care of. So for this kind of task, we have requested very seasoned and eminent scholars like Professor Kaushik Basu, who has been, at the helm of affairs in the World Bank as a chief economist and senior vice president, who has a long experience and wide variety of experience to dealing with policy issues in the developing countries as well as in developed world. And more specifically, he has been as a chief economic advisor to Government of India and visited Punjab also. And we had a very good interaction. He's very receptive, understand problems very easily, and provide solutions which are readily can be implemented. So for this, we have a choice, and I'm grateful that he has accepted our kind invitation despite his very busy schedule. So along with that, the Professor Nirvikar Singh, who is regularly working on Punjab economy, he's normally more worried than the people living in Punjab. So I think that he's a very good choice. And he has also, chosen a topic: rescue and rebirth. I think that is the issue which is expected to be talked about. So with these words, I also welcome on behalf of the Khalsa College as well as on my own behalf the two eminent personalities as well as all those who are participating. And I request now Professor Kaushik Basu to take over and kindly conduct the proceedings of this lecture. Thank you, Professor Kaushik Basu.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Ubha, Dharminder Singh Ubha. Thank you very much, Lakhwinder Singh. He's a friend from a long time ago. It's an absolute pleasure for me to be here for two reasons. The first one is the Punjab economy. And I have to say, growing up in India, early years of college in India, the Punjab was the big story for us. Right from the 60s, Punjab was the big story. The food basket of India growing at a phenomenal rate in terms of per capita income becoming dominant. It was the #1 economy during my college days. I remember very well, even during my early days in teaching in India, in Delhi. And it was a story to celebrate because there was a model there for all of us to look at, and collectively we felt good about it. I remember several times from when I was very young with my father traveling to Punjab, and much later also going there to, in fact, one of my last visits was when Lakhvinder had invited me. It had remained this great story, so I have an interest in Punjab. However, as is well known, it has been on a slide over the last 25 years or so, dropping in rank. There are Indian states which were clearly dominated by Punjab, have now overtaken. There's Haryana, Himachal Pradesh, Maharashtra, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, all have moved ahead of Punjab. Moving ahead, you never grudge. One state is doing well, it's something for all of us to celebrate. But Punjab, which was in a leadership role, what is it going wrong? I also feel, like I believe Nirvikar feels and several people feel, that do a few things right and Punjab can get back right there growing well. And I also feel that, yes, politics is murky, politics makes things difficult, but there is also an intellectual challenge. You really need to understand, is it agriculture that is stalling the manufacturing sector, or something somewhere the intervention's not taking place right? Was it the pesticide with the long run effect taking place, which you tried to correct? So I know very little specifically about the Punjab economy, but my mind is full of questions, and that's the reason why I was keen. I was also keen when Lakhvinder asked me to chair this session because Nirvikar Singh is a friend, and really more than a friend. I was just very keen to chair this with Nirvikar speaking. Let me just formally introduce him. He's the university professor at University of California, Santa Cruz. He was educated at the London School of Economics and University of California, Berkeley. He's the co-director of the Center for Analytical Finance at the University of Santa Cruz. He was a member of the high-level panel of advisors for India's G20 work to the finance minister, that time to Pranab Mukherjee. I was in government at that time. Nirvikar was part of a very small group, and really we had very important meetings with the finance minister, with the prime minister at that time on India's engagement in G20 and how we can do better. But before I give the floor to him, I should just mention on a personal note that he's a friend who goes back to our time as students to the London School of Economics. He was a little junior to me, but I don't want to embarrass him, but Nirvikar was absolutely the superstar at the London School of Economics. And when the results came out, I was a bit senior to him. This, I don't know if Nirvikar remembers, we were in the common room, whole lot of students, British students, us Indian students, whole of us, the students' common room. When the result came out, very seldom does a professor come down to the student common room to congratulate a student. But I remember Amartya Sen had come down to congratulate Nirvikar Singh about his phenomenal performance at the London School of Economics. But really more important than that, he's a close friend. And I think we share a lot of common values, and that's what brings us closer. It's an absolute pleasure to me to be here, mainly to sit back and listen to him. And then in the end, the question and answer session. I don't plan to speak very much, but I want to hear and then help conduct the Q&A. Nirvikar, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kaushik, for the very, very kind introduction. And thank you so much to Dr. Dharminder Singh Uba and Lakhvinder Singh for inviting me. And of course, Lakhvinder and I have co-edited a book on the Punjab economy where he really was the driving force. So he's been a very important collaborator in my efforts to understand what we can do to improve the situation in Punjab. Let's see. I'll just plunge straight into my slides, and let's see. Yeah. So can you all see the slides?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I chose a very dramatic title because I want to emphasize both the dire situation that Punjab is in and also the possibilities for transformation. I will actually, I have a slideshow with no numbers and no, there's one graph which is incidental, but really I wanted to tell you all a story. And I think it's really as as Kaushik and Lakshminda said, it's really important to understand the big picture here, and put things in perspective. And I'm a little nervous because I saw some very distinguished economists in the audience as well, people I know. So I'm looking forward to a very robust discussion, and if I can manage it, I'll try to actually not speak too long. I only have I think 10 slides as well. So I will, however, I will, however, start with a little bit of background, because I think it's important to just understand, the nature of Punjab. And here's a standard map from Wikipedia. Of course, what is important to realize if you look at this map is that the Punjab we're talking about is actually just a very small part of this region. And I think that also has some implications for how we think about the future of the Punjab economy. But anyway, I think it's always good to have in one's mind the setting, the history of Punjab, its particular geography, the fact that it has been a crossroads, a frontier society, both dynamic and vulnerable. It has been the home to multiple religious groups and a very, I think, dynamic and rich culture. And of course, very, very contentious politics. And all of these historical factors, I think, have continued to play a role in one way or the other. If we think about the history of Punjab, there's a couple of things that perhaps stand out. I think one is the British investment in agricultural infrastructure, irrigation infrastructure, which in some sense, and that goes back a century, in some sense that created the roots of Punjab's current economy, even though all that region is now in Pakistan. And the other very important milestone, of course, in all of this is partition. And if we think about partition in 1947, I'm bringing this up also again because that was a situation which could have been completely disastrous. If you think about the part of Punjab that went to India, and how all the agricultural, the best agricultural lands with the canal colonies and so on stayed in Pakistan, the big land holdings. This was really a situation which could have just gone downhill very quickly. What we saw instead was actually a very careful and I think orderly restructuring of Punjab. Here's a kind of a graphical representation where you have the princely states are absorbed, and then finally Punjab is in 1966 is split into Punjab and Haryana, and I mean that left some problems, but I think it's fair to say that this was actually a success in terms of local and national politics. One thing that has always struck me about this period also is the creation of new infrastructure in this abbreviated version of Punjab, where the state government developed local roads and market towns, and one started to have new irrigation infrastructure developed. And this was all, of course, a set of preconditions for the success of the Green Revolution, which again starts at this time where the political restructuring and consolidation of post-independence Punjab is complete. And this is, of course, the period that Kaushik was referring to, when we were young and Punjab was seemed like a role model for the nation, and there was this tremendous spirit of possibility and optimism. Now, if we look at the Green Revolution, it involved, of course, high-yielding varieties. It involved access to markets, access to water, use of fertilizer, and also the right kind of knowledge. Agricultural extension in Punjab, Punjab Agricultural University in Ludhiana was famous in those days for its efforts here, really enabled farmers to very rapidly shift to this new economy, where it was agriculture, which we think of, as economists, we think of this as traditional, but of course this involved a lot of technological innovation and also organizational innovation. And this was, again, done very successfully. So successfully, in fact, that Punjab has been completely locked in for almost 50 years now into this economy. And that, in some sense, is the root of the problem. And it is not, fixing that is actually not the solution, as I will explain. While in some sense Punjab, stayed, it was growing, but in some sense it stayed still. So when I was thinking about this, I was actually reminded of a very well-known book in management, in the field of management, which is about how successful firms keep doing what they're doing, and then they end up being undercut by agile innovators that don't seem like a threat at all. The analogy is not perfect, but what happened to Punjab, what has happened to Punjab reminds me of that, in the sense that and this goes back to, I think, what I think Kaushik said, that, or Lakhvinder said, that we need imagination to get out of this situation. We need to think of the possibilities. So the book is actually The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen, if any of you are interested. And he was a Harvard Business School professor who sadly passed away. Now, my point is that the world has not been staying still. And of course, Punjab's position in India and the world and in the region has in some sense, even after partition, it's still part of that region. And as we know, geopolitics has had a very severe impact on Punjab. I won't go into the details, but for example, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan had tremendous negative spillovers for Punjab over the following decade. I think another aspect of change that has been very important, and this has nothing to do with economics in a sense, though ultimately it does. But the rush of modernity, I think, has in Punjab created fears of loss of tradition, and I think that has also intertwined with the economic concerns that have worried leaders and people of Punjab. So I think modernity is not going away. So it is something that I think has to be understood and worked with rather than feared. And I'll come back to that maybe at the end. Of course, this is a period, especially in the last 3 decades of enormous globalization, particularly the rise of China. I mean, globalization, if you look at trade patterns and trade flows, it really takes off in the 60s, exactly when Punjab is getting locked into its green revolution economy. You also have a rise of a particular kind of nationalism in India, which then again in some sense connects with the fears of modernity, which I think have created adverse situations in Punjab. And finally, of course, what hasn't stood still is Indian economic policy, and we all just put all that into the word reform, or sometimes economic reform. And of course, that has driven the Indian economy in very important ways. I think where we are now, 3 decades later, it's not quite where we could have been, but it's an enormous change, an enormous improvement in many ways from where we were. This graph is actually not for Punjab, but it's of course the Indian economy. And you can see basically in a nutshell what has happened in the Indian economy, that the share of agriculture has fallen, the share of services has risen, and the share of industry actually has not budged, right? If we go from 1990 to now. And in some senses, if you compare Punjab to this graph, then you can see why Punjab has lagged behind. I've actually written a couple of papers on the lack of structural change in Punjab. So I apologize for not having any numbers here, but I've put lots of numbers in other work. Okay, so I use the word rescue, and I think I've been kind of saying the same thing for at least 5 years and maybe 10 years, that basically Punjab is heading for disaster. And for me, the eye-opener actually came in, I think 2011, when I was at a conference, and Upmanu Lal, who's a engineer and hydrologist, showed these maps of groundwater decline in Punjab, and said, well, this is going to lead to complete disaster. And here we are 10 years later, and we really haven't made a dent in the problem. And I know a lot of things are done around the edges, and I'll talk about why that is not enough in a moment. So groundwater decline is the worst part of it, but then you also have water pollution, soil pollution, air pollution, and these are sometimes byproducts, like the air pollution comes from a lot of it from burning stubble, which is rice stubble, which is a result of trying to reduce the groundwater decline. So it illustrates the challenges of policy making in this kind of situation. And we really do have stagnation, and Punjab obviously has been growing, but we know it's been growing much more slowly than the rest of most of the parts of the Indian economy. Maybe not compared to Uttar Pradesh, but that's not a good benchmark. And as Kaushik pointed out, Punjab has gone from near the top to the middle, and in some ways, I think that middle is also a result of the past. So Punjab could easily go further down if things aren't done quickly. And again, agriculture, which is supposed to be the crown jewel of the Punjab economy, actually the growth rate has been declining dramatically. Along with these very obvious economic problems, of course, you have increased inequality. One of the things that happened with partition was land reform and land redistribution, which actually created a pretty relatively equal and robust peasant society. And of course, that has been eroded. And some of that is perhaps inevitable, but some of it is a result of just poor government policy. And I know the image in other parts of India sometimes is that well, Punjab, why are Punjab farmers complaining? They're relatively better off than farmers in other parts of India. but there are a lot of Punjabi farmers who are struggling, and even if they are maintaining a particular income level, standard of living, often that is going with increased debt. And of course, that's in some sense the root of the protests that these photos illustrate. One is Punjabi farmers marching down to Delhi, and the other is actually from a small demonstration in New York from the diaspora. The diaspora will feature in my story shortly. We also have a lot of social instability, and again, some of this comes with rapid change, and some of it you could ascribe to prosperity, but a lot of it is actually the result of Punjab's lock-in. Where you have a significant portion of the population who have access to some kind of income, but really not any access to meaningful occupations, and that is a recipe for social disaster. And again, of course, the geography matters. We can go back to again the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and flows of drugs and guns into Punjab, and all of these are these are aspects of the situation in Punjab that I think have to be all surfaced. We should not pretend that any of these things are not there, and in some sense there's a lot of interconnections that I think we have to realize. We have to tackle these things together. So basically, Punjab is on the brink of disaster, and again, I've been saying that for a while. But then when you fall off a cliff, it happens very suddenly, right? You don't necessarily know when the cliff is going to give way under you. Now, what are the obstacles? I'm not the only one who's saying these things, and when I mentioned this talk to a colleague, he said, yeah, we know what to do. The question is how to do it. And my thought in response was that actually the what and the how are connected, and I'll explain. So why aren't we seeing a change? Well, one, of course, is politics. Politics at the global level, regional level, national and state level. And Lakhvinder Singh mentioned that we've had 30 years of elected governments, but in some ways I feel like there's still a legacy of that period that the normal politics was eroded in a particular way that is still casting its shadow. I think we can't use it as an excuse anymore, and certainly I think in the last few years I've seen I think a change in political thinking, and I'll just make a digression here. Some of that I think comes from my involvement in the expert group that was appointed by the Punjab government, led by Montague Singh Ahluwalia, and honestly, that was an absolute pleasure to work with that group of people, and also with the civil servants, the bureaucrats who were providing the liaison, because everybody seemed to be on the same page of, okay, let's understand the problems and get down into the weeds, and the how, a lot of the how is actually in there in some ways. And I'm mentioning it here because I believe that the report is public, and hopefully all of you will read it, because that I think is a wonderful document. Again, just to go through the hurdles, I think geography still matters. The location of Punjab is a problem, right? It is landlocked. It's in a region where you don't have land, flows over land, right? I mean, if you remember the first map I showed you, that was basically Punjab connecting to all of Central Asia and West Asia and so on, right? Those were the trade routes. And none of that is really effectively operational now. And so Punjab is just kind of tucked away in this kind of difficult corner of India, if you like. There's also, I think, an issue of lack of scale. Again, we talk about the success of agriculture, but honestly, growing wheat in Punjab is not necessarily a very efficient thing to do. If you look at wheat farming in Australia or Canada or the United States, that is efficient wheat farming, right? It's done at an enormous scale, which is never going to be achievable in Punjab, even with the consolidation of holdings. And that will be reflected in my remarks about going forward. There's also lack of scale in terms of I think manufacturing possibilities. And this is kind of complicated, but I don't think you can build a Shenzhen style manufacturing economy in Punjab. It's just not, it doesn't have that kind of scale. Even if I think of Bangladesh, right? Bangladesh has a scale which is, in terms of garments, you can't build a garment, textile garment economy in Punjab at that scale. And, it's interesting, Punjab had a very successful, woolen sector. A lot of that was, then it had these, relatively easy to access domestic and, foreign markets, especially in the Soviet Union. But if you think of the global economy now, Punjab really lacks scale in certain ways. And I say this despite the fact that, when I'm trying to explain to people, who are not from Punjab or, especially not from India, that, Punjab is worth considering on its own. I say, well, it's got a population greater than Australia and greater than 5 New Zealands, which I've found very, very helpful in terms of conceptualization. But nevertheless, it's a small economy, right? It's 30 million people. There's also the problem of vested interests, right? And here, of course, the green revolution economy has created, a successful class of some farmers have done well. I think the intermediaries, those who manage the supply of credit, those who buy the produce and act as intermediaries, even for access to government-run markets, and even suppliers of fertilizers. All of these, they are what I would call vested interests. They are actually benefiting from the current situation, and they can milk it for as long as suits them, and then move on to something else, which the farmers won't be able to do. And that's a little bit different from lock-in, because lock-in refers to people who are not necessarily doing that well, but they can't move out because of what I highlight as switching costs, right? Those switching costs were overcome by public policy in the 60s, right? The government provided seeds, it provided training, it provided the irrigation infrastructure. None of that is adequately available for farmers to switch out of the current wheat rice economy, where they're just providing food grains for government stocks so that they can rot in government warehouses. I mean, that to me, that is just the epitome of bad policy at the national level. And again, if I can make a digression, that is something that the national government should have paid attention to and fixed before they started to work on reforming agricultural markets. I think fixing the food procurement system should have come first. And because the problems of Punjab are a national problem, if Punjab becomes a desert, if it starts to look like what are those movies, Mad Max movies, then that's not going to do the country any good. Okay, so I think the idea of switching costs, it's a pretty mainstream economic idea, but I think public policy has to focus on overcoming those switching costs. there's also a lot of risk involved, which we can also, risk and uncertainty, which again, we can conceptualize a lot of that as switching costs. Some of it is going to be ongoing, so you need certain kinds of insurance. Now, to turn to where we can go from this, and this is where the what and the how are sort of connected. You might say, well, given all I've said, the issue is that you have to fix agriculture in Punjab, right? Because all the problems are there, and that's where the disaster is looming. But what I'm thinking is that the difficulties are so great, the hurdles are so great, the lock-in is so great that actually that's not the place to start. So the how, in some sense, what is feasible in some sense is, from my perspective, dictates what to do rather than starting with what and going to how. I think we have to say, okay, how are we going to get out of this position? And then that is going to tell us what to do. Okay, so now if I look at the world, certainly, that you can be pessimistic. I think Danny Roderick has been relatively pessimistic, that we're beyond the point where we're going to have this, big growth in manufacturing, large-scale manufacturing. Punjab is not going to be a global powerhouse in textiles or garments or automobiles or anything like that. And even other late entrants are going to have trouble, right? So plus they're all competing with China in many ways. So, but nevertheless, I would argue that new global opportunities keep arising. If you think of what is going on in the world, well, obviously, health is going to, because of the pandemic, is going to receive a lot of attention. We're going to have further health issues. Some of them are going to be these kind of pandemic issues. Others are going to be associated with aging. This is the world population is aging very dramatically. What I want to say is that there are always new opportunities, and a lot of these are global. So I think that's where the beginnings of strategic thinking have to lie for Punjab. We are actually in a period of enormous innovation. People are talking about the fourth industrial revolution and so on. And this I think is a remarkably innovative period. Instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, I actually like Brad DeLong's conceptualization, where he says, the initial industrial revolution was due to replacing muscle power with energy from fossil fuel sources. And now what we're seeing, this is Brad DeLong's conceptualization, where he may have borrowed it from somebody else, we're replacing brain power or augmenting brain power with information technology. And I think this is going to be a few more decades that we're going to see this going on. Now, so thinking about strategy then, I think what I want to argue is that the way Punjab has to move forward is to provide alternatives to agriculture. And that is not going to come necessarily from large-scale manufacturing. I'm not saying you can't have factories in Punjab, but I think one has to really think about products and services which have high value added. That's typically associated with product differentiation and customization. I think for all of this, because Punjab is going to have to reach global markets, you need a tremendously upgraded digital infrastructure. And looking at the data, which we did for the expert group report, Punjab actually is one of the better off states in terms of quality of digital infrastructure. But a lot of that is just driven by counting smartphones. And if you think about of true broadband access, I think even if Punjab is a little better than other parts of India, we're very far short of where India could be and should be. And again, I think the pandemic highlighted that. If you look at what happened in the US and other advanced countries, because we have we have broadband, switching education to long distance was relatively smooth. And India, again, has been a complete educational disaster during the pandemic. I think the other aspect of strategy that really doesn't get enough attention in policy thinking is human capital. And I realize that for a lot of India, just providing basic literacy is still not been achieved, and you have to do that. But if you look at the decline of India's universities, I think that is going to hamper India's growth. And Punjab, because it has relatively good position in terms of poverty and literacy, actually it's surprising to me that it hasn't really developed world-class universities already. It should have been doing that. I mean, the IT revolution in India was fed more by southern regional engineering colleges and not by Punjab so much. Okay, so these are the aspects of strategy, and so here's now a little bit of how. I think governance is absolutely the centerpiece of everything. Punjab's finances have been a mess for a long time. I think some of that again goes back to the 80s, and Punjab still spends a lot relatively on police. I think it was in a situation where the national government was providing extra money for security purposes and so on, and that kind of creates disincentives for raising own revenue. I think having a primarily agricultural economy, because agricultural income isn't taxed, has also created problems for Punjab. I think the organization of Punjab's government also, it has been very factionalized, and I think the absence of a normal politics where you have one party replacing another, again, some of that has taken a long time to kind of get back to normal because of the what happened in the 1980s. I think the diaspora, and I say this, of course, being part of the diaspora, so I'm sort of biased, I guess, but I think it's really been underutilized. So remittances to Punjab are quite substantial. A lot of those remittances go into things like building very nice farmhouses, which makes sense because that's risk-free, and it improves quality of life and status and so on. But whenever I've talked to members of the Punjabi diaspora, they've said, yeah, there's too much corruption in Punjab, not enough. It's not an easy place to do business. I think there's a real scope, though, for engaging the diaspora in creating innovation clusters. This, again, ties into the development of world-class universities. The possibilities, I think, are very real. And by innovation clusters, I mean something a little more elaborate than incubators, right? This is small groupings of human capital and access to finance and labor force and so on. So Silicon Valley, of course, is the quintessential innovation cluster, but so is Bangalore now. Bangalore is become tremendous, and we have to keep this in mind that when Bangalore started on this path, there were economists, I think the one, or maybe it was a sociologist, again sitting in Britain, saying, well, this is not what India should be doing. We're just, they're just techno coolies, and India should focus on, literacy and basic health. But a lot of India's growth, which does have positive spillovers, comes from the Bangalore Innovation Cluster, and then copies of that. So basically, in a nutshell, what I'm saying is that it's not going to work to push people out of agriculture. Where are they going to go? And what I'm saying is that to solve the problems of agriculture, you have to create a dynamic economy outside of agriculture. And that's really where I think policy has to focus. And what I would argue is that it can be done very, very quickly with some focused attention. It's a question of, it actually doesn't require that much money to build world-class universities and bring in world-class talent. It's actually a very small cost relative to building gigantic airports and ports and so on. Finally, the federal dimension, just to say something briefly about that. Again, going back to Punjab's history in the 70s and 80s, I think there's been this tendency to blame the national government for everything. And I think the central government has a lot of blame to acknowledge. But really at this stage, I think one has to really pursue some kind of negotiated settlement. And from my perspective, the major thing that the central government can do is to overcome the switching costs for moving Punjab out of this wheat rice lock-in. And agricultural diversification will not happen. We've been talking about that for 35 years in Punjab. It will not happen until there's some investment in overcoming those switching costs, where you're dealing with risks, and so some of this could be just extra transfers in some way or other, targeted transfers from the center to the state to say, okay, we're going to fix this. And the political cover could be that reform of the national procurement system, where there's a complete mismatch between what India needs and what the national food grain procurement system is doing. Okay, I'm sure this is something we can come back to, the federal dimension. So let me finish up. So I used the metaphor of or the word rebirth, because to me that actually captures the fact that Punjab has to completely reinvent itself. It has to be reborn. This is not a question of agricultural diversification. It's not a question of fixing things at the edges. You have to create a new economy, and you have to do it very quickly. And this is a region which has been associated, again, going back to what Kaushik was saying, with creativity, with hope, with energy, with opportunity, with optimism. And if you look at Punjab right now, everything just feels like the opposite. And it's kind of sad, because Punjabi culture is still very influential, right? I mean, you hear Punjabi music rhythms in Bollywood movies regularly. Punjabi food is in some ways a mainstay of Indian restaurants. I mean, maybe it's Mughlai, but I think a lot of it is just Punjabi. I think the cultural influence of Punjab is really quite outsized, and some of course, has been associated with the diaspora, where, for example, you have Punjabi women in Britain becoming leaders in fashion design. So these kind of things, I think, have to be recognized. And there's, when we think of things like the digital economy, I think it's too easy to think just of the nitty-gritty software, like payment systems and so on. And of course, that's a place where Indian firms are doing very well now. But also in terms of creating content, in media, the front end, there's a lot of opportunity, I think, or the arts. There's a lot of opportunity for that Punjabi creativity to display itself, to flower again. So, I know these images are somewhat stereotypical, but what I want to say is that Punjabi culture is not to be kind of pushed aside. And this again goes back to my point that modernity should not be feared, but it should be harnessed on top of tradition and existing culture. So one can innovate on that basis in many ways. I think the Punjabi diaspora has a very important role to play, especially for overcoming Punjab's geography and lack of scale. So I hope that has provided some food for thought. And again, no numbers, but just some ideas. And I'll be happy to talk about numbers if necessary. And I guess I have pretty much taken up all my time. So thank you. I'm going to stop sharing now and hand back to Kaushik.
Nirvikar, thank you very much. It's actually just full of ideas, and it was of great interest to me. And I think many of the things you were saying are of great interest to anyone in India, of how to get out of the situation that the whole country is getting into, and Punjab itself has got into, full of ideas. And actually, I do disagree with one or two minor points, maybe I'll come back to, but I think the broad thrust that it is in the space of ideas, the universities, that importance of that. And I feel that is one area where the cost is relatively small compared to the actual cost compared to the cost of ideas. You just need to bring the ideas to get these sectors started. So I'm glad you're emphasizing that. Okay, there are questions coming up. I don't know whether I have the power to unmute people, but I'm going to call on, I'm going to first pass this to Rajneesh Maini, who had a question. Before I give it to you, just one remark. Keep the questions short. There are many questions coming up. And then maybe, Nirvikar, should we keep giving back the floor to you or collect 2-3 questions? Let me give it back
whatever works. Maybe one at a time will be fine.
Yeah, let's do it one at a time. So Rajneesh Maini, the floor is yours.
Good morning. My name is Rajneesh Mani. I am a global strategist at Intel Corporation in the USA. And I really enjoyed the talk and the subject matter. My starting point is from the message that you gave about groundwater and pollution problem. My late father was head of both of those in Punjab. I'm from Patiala, where he spearheaded right after partition, bringing the groundwater in Punjab, the big Punjab, and then he was the head of the environmental protection department at Punjab. So, and then you talked into the human capital, and that's where I'm coming with a question. I think the notion of university was an example, but to be innovative, going away from the agriculture community, we must address right from the beginning in the global economy, in a globalization, the how do you create a really innovative education system right from the beginning. And from Intel Corporation, I have been spearing doing that in Punjab as well, across India. You know, other companies such as our company are doing exactly the same thing. So Dr. Nirvikar Singh, I would like you to address and see what do you think should be done in Punjab to reinvigorate the real innovation through the real education, not just the university professors talking about it. Thank you.
So very briefly, just think of the region around Chandigarh, and you have the Indian School of Business. You have now I think Khalsa University. You have other institutes. You have IIT Ropar, which is a short distance away. So I think one has to figure out a way to create university industry linkages, and also to provide some incentives to innovate in ways that will lead to new commercialization of products, or inventing new products. And again, it's easy to forget, but Silicon Valley really grew around Stanford. And Stanford did things like giving away some land and making it easy for professors to patent and so on. So I can't get into the weeds too much, but there are plenty of models. You can also look at the Israeli model of innovation clusters. I know one of my former colleagues on the expert group has looked at Israel in quite detail, and Israel has used ex-defense personnel very effectively in an innovation cluster economy. This is something that needs attention. There's actually some empirical work now being done on innovation clusters in India, which I think will be helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm adding to that. Actually, another country with intellectual property patents very high per capita is also doing well in terms as an economy is Korea. South Korea is investing in the idea space in a big way and growing very well. Within India, also Indian Institute of Science and Bangalore, I feel there was spillover effects of that kind of work and entrepreneurial inventiveness that was taking place. So yeah, very, very important. Let's jump to the next person. Jaskaran Singh is welcome.
Thank you, Basu sir. You have given me the opportunity. Nirvikar sir, you have suggested that solution of agriculture lies out in the outside of agriculture sector. Means we need definitely well-developed non-farm agriculture sector. But sir, Indian state sees the solution in form of market solution. But sir, should we need to bypass the agrarian question? Like definitely there is no need to follow that classical path of development from agriculture to non-agriculture sector, industry, then service sector. Like sir, what we can do in short term? Like we have a presently, we do not have any well-developed industrial sector. Then what is the fate of this small peasantry, sir, in short term? Thank you, sir.
Yes, no, I realize I may not have been completely clear. I'm not saying that one should ignore agriculture. I think diversification is very important. But again, one can think of agriculture in these terms. What are the high value added products? And so, for example, the dairy sector in Punjab has been relatively successful. But just to give you an example of where I think there's been a failure of imagination. So in my local warehouse store, I was very excited to find Verka yogurt. And I thought, oh, this is great. The Punjab government is actually, exploiting its success in dairy farming because Verka is a state-owned enterprise brand. But then it turned out that this is actually a member of the Punjabi diaspora in Canada who had trademarked Verka in North America because nobody in Punjab had thought to protect it globally. So he's making lots of money off the Verka brand, and this is just one trivial example. But in general, I think what I would argue is that what is happening in agriculture is that just that too many people who are locked into the system. And if you look at 35 years of trying for crop diversification, what I'm saying is maybe just put a pause on that and create some alternatives, and that will actually have positive spillovers. So, for example, if you have, and you can have both, you can have universities that focus on agri-tech. So again, if I don't mean to pick on Punjab Agricultural University, but I think a lot of the effort in Punjab Agricultural University is going into creating new, HYV varieties, which will be, robust against the latest pest or so on, or, need less water. But they're not really innovating that much in terms of, drip irrigation or, how can you grow other kinds of crops and do it robustly. So it's complicated, but what I would say is, you need to jumpstart the industrial economy to really get some traction out of where Punjab is now.
Nirvikar, there's a whole bunch of people wanting to ask questions. I'm just giving the names so that we may not be able to cover all. I'm going in order. There were some raising hands and then some using the chat function, and I'm not good at multi-managing so many things, but here are the names I can see. There's Sukhpal Singh, there's Dr. Varinder, Harnoor Singh, Ranjan Aneja, Shweta Dhaliwal. There may be more names, but let me go through these in exactly that order. So Sukhpal Singh next.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Basu. Nirvikar, I think it was amazing to hear your quick sort of take on the entire issue, which is very, very large and complicated issue. I am with you on the innovation part, but I would have been happier if you added institutional innovations to that domain of innovation. But I have discomfort with your entire explanation of the issue of Punjab's lack of development in terms of the geographical dimension of the state's location. I think we have been earlier blaming Delhi Dalwar sitting in other countries as diaspora. Now we have started blaming even other countries around us rather than finding problem within the house of ours, which is within Punjab. We always sideskip that issue. I don't know why. Now I have two major questions to you other than these 2 points. One is that you said there is a problem of scale in Punjab. Punjab is a small state. Everything Punjab does is small in scale. I would like to ask you this question that India has resolved this question for some time now. We have created so many small states which are done wonderfully well, whether Uttarakhand or Jharkhand or even other states. And we are trying to create more smaller states. We know that smaller states can be governed better rather than large states like UP, which go nowhere. So I would like your comment on that. The second question I have, which is equally important, is that though you give a sort of clean chit to Punjab government and to Punjabis by and large, but this expert committee you referred to recommends the very laws, farm law, which the farmers unions are protesting for 10, 11 months now. Do you think these new farm acts can resolve any of Punjab problems, including this lock-in and switching costs? Do you think that can really lead to the right direction, or it will create more problems for the state of Punjab and its agriculture? Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so that this is wonderful. I feel like Sukhpal, you could have given a better lecture than me, but let me try to clarify. So in terms of geography, I guess no, you're right. I mean, one can't blame everything on geography, but I guess my point was that there's certain things that are hard to do in Punjab because if you want to export something which has a very low value to weight ratio, it's difficult to do from that position, geographic position, given the internal transportation infrastructure that India has. If you're a region with access to a modern port, it completely changes the game, I think. So that's my point in terms of geography. And that's why I think there's really Punjab should be thinking in terms of more high value added products and customization, differentiation, and so on. And the thing is that there's actually lots of scope for that. There's almost no end to what one can do with gadgets, for example, or instruments, and there's so many, or components. The other issue there in terms of geography is it's a little harder to plug into the regional production networks, right? Again, I think Tamil Nadu is much better placed in that sense, because the center of economic gravity there is in Southeast Asia, so there is a geographic advantage there, I think. In terms of scale, I think you're absolutely right. I think I was not clear. When I'm talking about scale, I'm talking about economic scale. Whereas politically, actually, scale is not so relevant and often works in the opposite direction. And as you pointed out, states like Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand have been doing fine at small scale. In fact, I would argue that even as a small state, Punjab is overly centralized. That if it gave more autonomy to its cities and allowed the cities to control their property taxes, that would actually, in particular, it would be supportive of innovation clusters, because the cities could potentially compete with each other. In fact, talking to one of my colleagues on the expert group, I had suggested that there should be a kind of a creation of 5 or 10 innovation clusters, and they, besides competing economically, they should also each have a sports team, so that they were competing in terms of sports, so that there's you create this extra dimension of competition. I don't think anybody will do that, but competition is a natural human human motivation, which is not that difficult to harness. And I think scale, small scale helps there, decentralization in particular. And again, decentralization to the city level, not village level. Sorry, you asked several questions, but in terms of what the expert group wrote about agriculture in particular, what I would say is that there was a preliminary report which the government reacted to, Punjab government reacted to, and the final report, I think, reflects that government's reaction. And a lot of that has to do with, the politics of the situation. And in that sense, I completely agree. That's why I'm saying that it's so politically fraught to say, okay, we're going to, we're just going to change things and throw you to the forces of the market. And, of course, see, that's the puzzle of the farmer protest, because, on the surface, it looks like, well, why are these farmers protesting? Because they're part of this sort of secure system. And the reforms are really not going to affect them, the market reforms. But of course, what the farmers realize is that that protection is very fragile and could be removed. And my point is that the protection is actually killing the farmers in the long run, because it's locking them into a system which is disastrous. So, my approach is actually to say, okay, if some things are just too politically difficult, there's plenty of other things that we can do which will change things. And once people realize that there are alternatives outside agriculture or even within agriculture with adequate backstops, that I think people will be less fearful of what is life going to be like outside this disastrous procurement system. So I hope I didn't miss any of your questions.
Thank you.
Nirvikar, I can at least have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions. I was wondering, should we take on 2 at a time now?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And let's do that.
Yeah. And if while I'm talking, maybe you can look at the chat and see if there's some that can be bunched together.
I will take a look at that. Yeah. So let me take on Dr. Varinder, and after that, Harnoor Singh.
Hello, sir. Are you listening me, sir? Hello.
Yes, we can
Yes.
hear you. Yes,
Yes,
yes.
Sir, my question is this, that Professor Nirvikar, do you think that our politics in Punjab remained only around to protect the identity, Punjabi identity, but never it was serious to develop the state in this new market economy regime? Thank you, sir.
And well, I mean, it's a short question, but let's take on Harnoor Singh as well.
You're muted.
Is he speaking and muted, or I'm not seeing
Yeah,
him?
I don't know. Let me.
Why don't you take this, and we've got.
Yeah. So what I would like to say is that I think identity is misused by politicians, and there's no reason for identity to be an issue in Punjab. I think it's a red herring. Punjab did very well in the 50s and 60s, and the identity issues were there. So I would say that let's just put identity aside. We have multiple religions and cultures, and India is a very diverse, heterogeneous society, and I don't think that that makes things particularly worse in Punjab. I realize, again, it's the only Sikh majority state and all of that, but I don't think that one should focus on it too much. And again, some of what happened in the 80s was connected to that, but I think we should be beyond that. And these are two different realms. You can have, again, as I emphasized, you can protect tradition, you can protect culture without separating from or giving up on modernity in the ways that matter.
Yeah. Harnoor, we can see you now. Yeah, and we can hear you as well. You're unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah, very good morning, sir. Sir, I'm a master student in economics presently. Sir, I have a question. I have the data with me from the Punjab Agriculture University, and it says that 83% area of the Punjab is under cultivation, and 65% of the population is directly or indirectly dependent on it. And we see that 3 farm laws are under contention. And so far, considering with all the data that has been provided by the sir, that education institutions play a very major role in it. So I don't see any major hand played by the government in anywhere helping out to modernize the Punjab economy. So how can we actually welcome privatization in Punjab economy so that it is also acceptable by the people, and it does not bring out that retaliation which is seen, that aggression which is filled in the youth, or say old age people, because they are the ones who are the root of the Punjab economy, because they have been into this profession since ages, and now they want to continue that.
Yeah, Nirvik. Yeah, thank you.
So so again, what I will say is that agricultural marketing reform is a good idea if it's done well. I think the timing and design of the farm laws was very suboptimal. And in particular, I would argue very strongly for before agricultural marketing reform to actually fix the food procurement system. And then, again, what I've been trying to say in all of this is in some ways an answer to your question. Until people in Punjab see a dynamic alternative, they are not going to want to give up the current situation, even though they're about to fall off a cliff. They're just going to keep pumping the water deeper and, staying afloat. They have to pay their debts. They're basically borrowing to, buy the imports. They're getting this free water and power, which is a very pernicious government subsidy. But everybody is like, okay, this is, we don't know how to get out of this, and they're trying to do things around the edges, like changing the rice growing season. If you just look at Haryana, even Haryana has done better at the edges in terms of shifting out of rice, for example. And then if you look at the trajectory of Haryana, I would argue, and I hope this analogy helps, Haryana has become a different state because of what happened in Gurgaon. So people in Haryana realize that, yes, we can have a different future than just this green revolution economy, which is, subject to diminishing returns and going to take us nowhere. And what you're seeing, for example, is also then, the creation of, new private universities like Ashoka University. And again, Haryana benefits from being closer to Delhi, but Punjab is not that far away. So basically, you have to give people a vision, a feasible vision, a realistic, a realizable vision of some alternative. That's what I'm arguing.
Harnoor, and I'm tossing in my remark on the farm bills. Nirvi and I have written together on this. I also believe, and I've said for a long time, that you do need reforms, procurement system reforms. But I think the way it is done is if you just open up the market with a few big buyers facing hundreds and thousands of small farmers, it is exactly what in the United States you worry always about antitrust, that the group of sellers will be very badly exploited because it will be just 3 people buying from them, so mega buyers. and the bargaining power is so asymmetric. So you need to attend to those things. So yes, the way it is done is not the way to go, but there is a lot of reform to be done. Let's go to the next person, Ranjan Aneja, and then Shweta Dhaliwal. I'm going back to the model of one question at a time. So let's take Ranjan Aneja, and then we'll come to Shweta. I'm not seeing Ranjan. There was actually, it came through the chat group, but maybe then Shweta Dhaliwal, if you unmute and ask your question, if Ranjan is still around, his question had come some time ago. He had said he wanted to ask a question. You go ahead now, and then he can come in.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to be part of this amazing event. Now, I am from political science, so I cannot even begin to comment on how do I look at agriculture crisis of Punjab. But then I wanted to know that under say there's this global talk about focus on traditional knowledge when it comes to sustainable development goals. What are we doing with respect to Punjab's traditional knowledge of maybe grain storage, maybe water conservation? We don't have any more we don't have any more talabs, and those that we are left with are dying. So I would be enlightened by your input, sir, and kindly guide me, because I would like to do some work on this line. And thank you so much for your opportunity.
Yeah, I actually don't know the specifics of Punjab in that respect. I mean, obviously, canals and groundwater are farmers are revealing their preference. I think, my impression is that this is an all India problem, and it has to do with kind of local governance, and again, providing some kinds of incentives and to maintain the infrastructure and share the water and so on. So I will say that from my study of other parts of India, creating water user associations is very effective. And so basically, this is all direct descendant of Eleanor Ostrom's work. So I think India could benefit from thinking about those things, absolutely.
There was a question from Varleen Kaur. I wonder whether she's still asking, or Varleen Kaur. Okay, if not, then there is also, is it Gur Gaurav I'm seeing? Yeah, Gur Gaurav and Gurpreet Singh. Let me take these two because these are fresh hands that have come up. People, maybe their questions are getting answered in the process, so hands are coming up and going down. So Gur Gaurav.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Sir, I am a public builder. I am more or less concerned with the study that is taking up the more of the free power, more of the subsidy that the government is giving. Much of the share is going for the paddy. I have talked to the farmers, like there are many reforms required, but simplistically going, paddy is the main cause of many problems in Punjab actually. So why can't we just give a MSP for time being on some other crop? Paddy. It would be a short term, like Government of India declares MSP on 23 crops, but it is only giving like 22 crops MSP. Why is Government of India or Punjab not actively pursuing like leave MSP on paddy and give MSP on some pulses or something that is consuming much less water? It would be a very short term measure. Thank you.
Yeah. So no, absolutely. I think Punjab could do more in terms of incentivizing shifts away from paddy. I think Haryana, Punjab is doing a little bit, but Haryana is doing more. And there is the issue of fiscal space. And I saw something in the chat from Professor Sukhvinder Singh about this. And so what I would argue is that this is exactly where the state government should be showing some political skill in terms of federal negotiation with the central government, and say to the central government, look, it's not in your interest if Punjab's agricultural plains are completely destroyed, which is going to happen. Instead, give us some money to help shift out of rice and wheat. And I was earlier saying, well, we lack enough scale in wheat, but on the other hand, rice is an even worse crop for Punjab because it's so water intensive. So you could also potentially shift from ordinary paddy to basmati. It's not easy because for farmers there's a wheat rice cycle, and everything is again there's a lot of complementarities. Everything is tied in. I feel like sometimes just sort of piecemeal solutions don't really do enough. And again, I realize that there's a lot of potential to tackle these issues in the short run. And I didn't want to suggest that one shouldn't do that. But what I was, I guess, trying to say is that that's not an adequate rescue mission. It's just going to slow the slide off the cliff, that you really need to dramatically create a new economy. And I know that sounds maybe that sounds too much like a pie in the sky, but that's what I'm pushing.
Nirvi, thank you very much. I was going to, the hands seem to have gone. There are lots of questions. Sorry, was there? Let's take one more then. We've got just about 6-7 minutes more. So yes, someone spoke, and go ahead, though I don't see a hand.
Yes, Basu, can I raise the question?
Sure. Let's do one more. Yeah.
Right. Professor Nirvikar Singh, look at the long historical transition of Punjab economy. When we entered into the late 70s and early 80s, Punjab economy was marching towards a transformation from a agricultural to relatively non-agricultural economy. Then a decade's period of turmoil has almost collapsed the whole developmental administration. And since then, we are not able to, in the last 30 years period of time, pick up on that ground. So I think that is the kind of long-term failure of a state government that can help to transform the economy is the question, and how that restoration can be done, especially keeping in view the experience of the East Asian countries.
Yeah, Nirvi, go ahead.
Yeah. So, again, I think you will find elements of a way forward in the expert group report. I mean, the one thing that I kept emphasizing for the expert group was digital infrastructure. And then I think the creation of innovation clusters where, for example, making sure that innovation clusters have adequate, broadband access. And that means, the Indian government has this project of getting, fiber to every panchayat, and those cables get laid and then they don't get used because the panchayats don't really need that much bandwidth. But if you have enough bandwidth for firms to actually operate, it makes a difference. I'll just give you a local example. I live in a small town. Santa Cruz is a small town. We're only 50 kilometers away from Silicon Valley, but there's it's a range of small mountains, so it's a little windy road. Maybe not by Indian standards, but it is a little bit of a barrier. I remember a decade or more ago, one of the city managers said, we're going to invest in connecting to the major backbone, internet backbone, because that's what's going to attract firms to Santa Cruz. So it's a nice place to live. If you make so for example, there are parts of Punjab where I think people would love to live right now. Close to the hills, you can escape to it. Escape to Kasauli and whenever you want. But my point is that Santa Cruz is now attracting lots of small IT startups because they have access to fiber. They can get bandwidth not only can they get the bandwidth, but it's relatively cheap because there's plenty of it. There's enough competition there. So you may not be making an IT product. So in one of the news stories I looked at a few years ago, there was a small firm in Punjab making customized saddles and exporting them all over the world. But in order to do that, I'm sure you'd want to have a good internet connection so that customer is never going to be faced with a website that doesn't work and so on. Now, of course, underlying the digital infrastructure is power, electric power, and again, there's this terrible misuse of electric power in Punjab, which is also true in the rest of the country. So there are some bigger issues which I think have to be solved at the national level, in terms of the power grid and so on. But given, what I would argue is that if you think about where the economy is going to go, you can't tell exactly where Punjab will succeed, but if you give everybody plenty of bandwidth, I guarantee somebody will succeed. There are other things I can think of too, like if you make it very cheap for people to acquire digital printers, right? Digital printers are very important for creating prototypes and customized products and so on. And again, it's a very good way of overcoming scale issues. So there are specific things that I think the government can do and say, okay, these are the building blocks of a 21st century economy, and make sure that those building blocks are in place.
Nirvi, I'm actually, as you're speaking, I was adding, and I'm glad, Professor Ubha, you're bringing in the East Asian countries. I have a feeling with the COVID-19 over the last year and a half or 2 years, the digital needs and usage is going to grow in leaps and bounds, because there was this old concept of learning by doing. Technology that is there, we still don't know quite how to use it. But if you just think of all of us over the last year and a half, the expertise we've picked up in the use of digital technology, long distance lectures, meetings, so many things happening. I feel this is going to speed up enormously. And countries that position themselves to take advantage of this, they are going to do very well. And I think a whole lot of East Asian countries are viewing this very well, positioning themselves to come up. And even the newer countries like Vietnam and others are coming up very well. India needs to realize exactly the point that is being made over here, that there is a pickup in this digital technology, which was there for now 2 or 3 decades. But over the last year and a half, it's going to be a transformation. And Punjab, India, any part of the world that wants to do well really needs to think in terms of strategic ways of hooking up to this and taking advantage of it. Time is running out. Thank you very much, Nirvikar. Thank you very much, Dr. Singh. Dr. Singh, Dharminder Singh Ubha, thank you very much. Lakhvinder Singh, I don't know if any one of you want to put in a last word. I mean, I've been talking throughout, so I'm not coming in.
Yes,
I can see a hand raised by, yes, come in then, Air Marshal Gill, yes.
Sorry, sir, I am the odd man out. I'm a fighter pilot by profession, but retired now.
Please
and,
come in, yeah.
Settled in Punjab, and it pains me to see the plight that this beautiful state has got itself into. Thank you so much for offering this opportunity. Nirvikar sir, 2 issues that I seek your clarification on is, one is the scale. We say that, which is true, we say that in Punjab, the scale at which the Punjabi farmer operates is very small, and is only diminishing with time because of our laws of inheritance. But then if you look at other countries like Australia, America and all, where the farm holdings are very large, there also the farmers exist on huge subsidies from the central government. The other point is about the forces of the market. Sir, left to the forces of the market, I wonder really if agriculture has survived any part of the world. Otherwise, if it was for the forces of the market to decide the price, the farmers across the world won't need subsidies.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think those are both valid points, and I think I would say that I think the problem is not with subsidies per se, because there is a case to be made for certain kinds of subsidies. If not price supports, then income supports, which might be more efficient, or insurance. And if you look at support systems in other countries, sometimes they are actually better designed than what we have in India. But I guess my main point is that it's the particulars of the subsidy regime, right? Where India, pulses should be cheaper and should be much more widely available in India. And instead, the government is going on subsidizing, rice and wheat, and procuring rice and wheat and letting it rot. And they haven't really done a major rethink of the whole food grain system in India. So I'm not arguing against support for farmers. I'm saying that the way the current system is designed is enormously inefficient at a national level, and the government should have fixed that, or started to fix that, before looking at the market end of it. They should have fixed the production end before the market end, the incentives they're providing at the production end. So that's my kind of take on it. And you're absolutely right. Farmers everywhere, benefit because of the uncertainties. I think the major issue there is really that you can get wiped out by the weather at any time.
Well,
so I think Professor Kaushik Basu has to, wind it up, and after that I will say a few words of vote of thanks.
Yeah. So, well, let me just, I also, winding will be just for me to say a few things, and then I'm going to pass it to you for a vote of thanks. Nirvika, first of all, thank you very much. I hope there was, as you could see, huge amount of interest. And I hope there were people from other parts of India also who were listening, because there are germs of ideas to be taken anywhere to do better. And this is really for the country, I feel, because of the structural changes taking place in the global economy. It is a critical time. There will be new winners and new losers, and we are already beginning to see, if you look at the global map, there are regions coming up that were not doing well earlier, and there were regions going down. It's a very critical time to put our best minds to thinking and taking up the new opportunities that will come up and change our ways. There's always transactions cost, the switching cost that you're referring to, when you're changing your ways, and you can't do that suddenly in a rush, and you have to think of buffers for the people who will get affected. So there's a lot of fine planning involved. But you have to do that if you want to come out on top of the world. And for me, the Industrial Revolution 100 years is a fascinating period when technology was changing, but there were countries that were doing miserably badly because they were not being able to cope with the new technologies that were coming in. And at the end of the Industrial Revolution, the landscape of the global economy had changed because there were new winners and new losers. And the world today stands probably at a very, very similar juncture, and not surprisingly at all. I mean, Nirvikar has touched on some of our most biggest challenges. And for India, for the world, and for Punjab, it's a region that we used to look up to when we were in college, a region doing phenomenally well. We wanted to revive and come up and do well. And really also, I'm putting in a word that Nirvikar put in, identity politics is really politics, which does more harm than anything else. There are regions that can do better just on their own through the vibrancy, and we must keep that up. Let me pass this back on to Lakhvinder and anybody else for vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Kaushik Basu, for conducting this session stimulatingly. As participation was enormous, and I think that Professor Nirvikar Singh has provoked many, minds, and I think that more discussions is expected to take place after this lecture. So I would like to just say one or two words with regard to the kind of series which we have started, and you both have agreed to initiate it. And I'm really grateful, and the Khalsa College as a whole is grateful to both of you. But the one of the very important idea which one has to look into it is that when Punjab was thriving and serving the country as a whole, providing the food security to the country, when Punjab turned into problems, you'll find that the country has turned back towards Punjab. I think this is a very important, any problem Punjab has to solve, it cannot be solved all alone. So what one has to look into is that the central government is required to be very sincere and sensitive to look into the problems which Punjab has locked in. And I think that the joint responsibility, if they are able to shoulder, I think no problem in this world which cannot be solved. So I think that the central government, if sincerely, having a hand holding to Punjab, and I think there are possibilities that these challenges can be overcome and Punjab can return back to the kind of new glory rather than the older one, new glory which is expected to make country proud. And you will find that they have a huge amount of human capital as well as diaspora which can contribute a lot. So I think that the points which you have raised are important, and I think that the inaugural lecture is expected to raise many issues which you have done it successfully. So I'm really grateful that you have wonderfully worked very hard to bring out all these kind of issues, and we have an opportunity to take all these kind of issues in further kind of discussions. We are going to hold this regular series of lectures, even from the macro perspective to the microscopic kind of aspects, and we will discuss threadbare all the kind of issues, and I hope you will be able to participate in further discussions. So I'm really grateful to you that you have find time with a short notice and delivered wonderful lectures. Professor Kaushik Basu, you are always kind to us, and I'm really grateful that you have decorated this lecture, and you are a so wanted economist all over the world, given us so much time. I'm really grateful to you. The credit goes to all the people who are participating till now at the midnight, listening and participating. I'm really grateful to all of them. And on the above all, Dr. Dharminder Singh Upa, principal of the Khalsa College, very dynamic personality who has taken up this issue very seriously and shoulder all the kind of facilities for this lecture. I'm really grateful to him and the management of the committee of the Khalsa College, which is relatively very liberal, allowing me to conduct such kind of activities. We are going to have more seminars and the kind of lecture series like that. So at the end, I'm really grateful to all of you, and I will request you to kindly keep supporting this kind of attempts which we have been making in the future as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Lakhvinder, Kaushik, Dharminder. Thank you so
Thanks
much.
a lot.
Thank you to everyone in the audience for the great questions.
Thank you. Thank you. So nice of you. Thank you. Good night
Bye-bye
to everyone. Good night.